In the movie Don't Look Up, it showed a dramatic scenario where the government didn't take scientists and their findings seriously, leading to the end of humanity. However, in real life, it is not that no one takes science seriously, but a lot of times, policymakers make assumptions about human rationality that are outdated and are based on traditional views that do not reflect our actual thinking. That is why we need scientists to better inform them by building models that factor in human feelings. In the last video, we invited Dr. Konstantin Spendagas to talk about fuzzy logic that could quantify people's thoughts and use numbers to predict their behaviors. However, do you know your feelings could be used to solve two of the most imminent problems in the world, which are no different from the impending comic strike? Well, in this video, we will look at Konstantin's paper published in Applied Energy and see how it puts fuzzy logic into practice. So, Konstantin, in one line, what was your motivation to conduct this research?
To put it simply, I wanted to improve the way human behavior is represented in engineering, economic, and other simulation models with the purpose of better informing energy and climate policy.
Sounds very interesting. But how is this related to assumptions policymakers make about people's behaviors? And also, how is this whole thing related to energy crisis and climate change?
Well, to tackle climate change and to overcome the energy crisis, it is crucial to implement policies that encourage the generation and use of more renewable and low-carbon energy. And also policies that encourage us, the consumers, to adopt more energy-saving behaviors. However, energy policies are not always successful in that regard. That's why we see phenomena like the energy efficiency paradox, where the efficiency targets achieved are lower than what policymakers expected.
And what do you think is the reason behind this?
This is because our behavior as humans is very complex, and policymaking does not always understand that. Every time an energy policy is implemented, there are certain expectations about how people will embrace it, right? And these expectations are usually based on the assumption that we, as energy consumers, we're always fully rational, self-interested, and we only care about maximizing our own benefit. However, things are very different in reality. Psychology and behavioral economics have demonstrated that our energy decisions are also influenced by our emotions, social norms, and altruistic values, and that we're not always completely rational. Engineering and economic models that are used to inform policy are also commonly based on these older assumptions.
So how are you tackling this challenge in this paper?
To fill this gap, this paper develops a mathematical model that can simulate more realistically how people make energy decisions based on insights from behavioral economics and psychology. In this way, it can help us better understand the factors that drive consumer energy decisions with the purpose of designing more effective energy policies.
I understand that you use Hong Kong as a case study for the model. So how did you build a model and how does it work?
The model is developed from the human perspective, and its rules are based on human reasoning and intuition. It considers monetary, personal, and environmental variables in order to predict whether people will buy efficient air conditioners for their home and how often they will use them. So the idea is that this type of modeling can be used to simulate any kind of energy-saving behavior. But for this paper, we start with the idea of simulating the behavior that has to do with cooling energy, which is, as you know, the largest contributor of total energy consumption in Hong Kong because of the subtropical climate. So, we start with this very essential equation. We want to estimate the energy consumption of a cooling system of a household in a given month. To do this, we need to know three parameters. Firstly, the capacity of the cooling system the household requires. And by cooling system, we mean the air conditioning or AC system. Secondly, the energy efficiency ratio of the AC that will be bought. Thirdly, the total number of hours the system is operating in that month. The equation is used under the assumption that when the AC operates, it does so at full capacity. If we add the EM of all the months of the cooling season, then we get the annual cooling energy consumption. Our fuzzy model consists of three parts, which we call fuzzy inference systems, or FISs. Each system predicts a decision that corresponds to a particular variable in the equation. FIS1 predicts the cooling capacity, FIS2 the energy efficiency ratio, and FIS3 the probability of the system being on during particular hours of the day. From this, we approximate the total number of hours the system is operating. Each FIS consists of membership functions and fuzzy rules, which we design based on common practices in the literature and on intuition. If you want to know more about what a membership function is, make sure you watch our previous video. If you remember, in that video, we used membership functions to predict whether Peter Parker and Tony Stark will buy a Netflix subscription. Let's now use a similar example to show how the FIS1 in this paper works. Say that Peter and Tony want to buy a cooling system with the appropriate cooling capacity for their home. We assume that this decision is driven by their incomes. First, we have the fuzzification process, which means that the input, in this case income, is transformed from its numerical form to a linguistic form through a membership function. Then, based on the fuzzy rules, the input is turned into an output. For instance, if income is low, then cooling capacity is low. If income is high, then cooling capacity is high, and so on. The rules are simply based on common sense and intuition. For instance, Peter is a student. His income is lower, so he lives in a smaller property. Therefore, he needs a system with a lower cooling capacity that will be enough to keep his property cool when it's hot outside. On the other hand, Tony is a billionaire, so he has higher income, which means he lives in a bigger property. Therefore, he needs to buy a system with a higher capacity to keep his property cool. However, the output is still in a linguistic form, so we need to turn it into a numerical form. This is the defuzzification. It's the final step in the process, and it's done through an output membership function. Now, FIS1 had one-to-one mapping and simple rules. The other two systems have more complex rules and more inputs. For instance, ambient temperature, humidity, the price of electricity, and people's different planning horizons. But the overall logic is exactly the same. Another input for the other two systems is the sense of environmental responsibility of the decision maker. This is not always a tangible concept, and it's not always easy to have data that represent how environmentally responsible certain parts of a given population are. In the paper that immediately followed this one, we were able to collect such data for Hong Kong. But at the time this first fuzzy model was designed, we had to run several hypothetical scenarios, with each scenario assuming different values of the environmental responsibility parameter being allocated across the population. In total, we had 30 scenarios.
So how did you validate a model? How does it compare to traditional methods used to predict consumer energy behaviors?
We validated the model using publicly available data for both the output and the inputs. The output was the total cooling energy consumption, and the inputs were parameters like income, ambient temperature, and humidity. We use a particular statistic, the coefficient of determination, and when we compare our scenarios with the data, we got coefficients up to 65%, which is quite high given the intangible and abstract nature of the behavioral parameters involved. Further validation of the model was realized by conducting sensitivity analysis, where tweaking key input variables of the model produced plausible model behaviors. Overall, we found that our model can simulate real energy consumption for a whole city more accurately compared to traditional modeling techniques where the behavioral aspect of energy use is not taken into account. This gave us confidence that with the appropriate projected data, we can achieve accurate projections of future trends as well. And we did so without relying on complicated building simulation techniques. but by using only behavioral and social parameters that are consistent with human logic, intuition, perceptions, and experience. This whole approach is very useful in representing human reasoning in energy modeling, with the purpose of answering not only the how much energy people are using, but also the why. What are the specific drivers that make people use specific amounts of energy in specific times? And this is something that the conventional energy simulation models do not address normally. In the future, this will be essential for designing more effective energy conservation policies. Our case study was cooling energy consumption in Hong Kong, but this modeling idea can be adjusted and expanded to potentially model energy consumption from any kind of use in any location in the world, given of course that we feed the system with the appropriate data from that location.